Good evening and welcome. I'm Terry Sanchez, Program Specialist here at the Newport Beach Public Library. It's my privilege to get to welcome you all here tonight as we are thrilled to be presenting California Poet Laureate Lee Herrick. I'd like to make sure that I take a moment to thank the Friends of the Library who have sponsored this event. It is because of their generous support that we are able to have nights like tonight. So thank you to the Friends. And then just to let you know, at the conclusion of Mr. Lee's reading, we will have a time for Q&A. So you probably noticed the cards in the back. You're welcome to fill any out, drop them in the basket. We will also be coming around. So sometimes you think of questions during the presentation. If you do, just kind of look at us, and Victoria or I will bring you a card and we'll collect it from you and we'll get your questions out here, and we will do our best to get to everyone's questions. So just know we're doing that, and if you haven't already silenced your cell phones, we'd like to remind you to do that at this time. Thank you. So before I bring up Mr. Herrick, we've got a very special guest I'd like to bring up. Olivia Lee is a high school sophomore. She recently won first place in the statewide poetry writing competition administered by the California Arts Council. With her original poem titled My American Alphabet. We've invited her to kick off our evening by reading her poem tonight. Please join me in welcoming Olivia Lee.
So thank you so much for the introduction. I met Lee Herrick through this past weekend at Sacramento with a Poetry Ourselves and Poetry Out Loud program. So Lee is so inspirational and so supportive of students, so it's an honor to be able to speak here tonight. Again, this poem is titled My American Alphabet. Is evidence of the offenses I now plead guilty to. A list of felonies counting since my infancy. I can criticize the Latin lords and the fault of cartographers, but it cannot change the rhythm of my American, my iambic pentameter English delinquent. Assimilation is all inside out. So backwards bound, the law can't keep up, 'cause the immigrants yearned acceptance, now their children want vengeance, but all I feel is absence. All I feel is shame like epistrophe, like every family reunion where I am interrogated. Like my dumb silence while being interrogated by the umbawai that gave up everything for me interrogated, where I am charged with a second-gen crime every time I speak. But at this dining table, after we've said grace, I can open my mouth and ignore the weight of my tongue when here we are too busy savoring the banseo to confuse flavorful, long, with full, nah. The unspoken upholds our promise, where our heritage is in the hands of a chef, and our food is every bridge, shortcut, and ship, the sweet jaya held in the pocket of our stomachs in the Eden of our liver. Reminiscent of love deeper than the words I don't have. There are stories that wake in the salty wonders of Nukmam, where an ocean and her tears are cupped beside each plate. Voices rebirth in every spoon of Bumbawe that scalds my throat, and I know that with immigrant comes dismemberment, comes the mar of a diaspora's dialogue, comes my distant English on some end of the escape. But there was always a reverence for what only hands could create and our whole bodies remember. No matter what words I use, they cannot say all there is to be said and all there is to be held. But I can taste them for myself, take them into my very being. This is the love I know that no language can begin to translate. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Olivia. That was stunning. Well, we are thrilled to be presenting to you tonight our California Poet Laureate, Lee Herrick. Lee was born in South Korea and adopted at 10 months of age. He was raised in a loving family in California's Central Valley and currently lives and teaches in Fresno, California. He was the Fresno Poet Laureate from 2015 to 2017, and last November was appointed the California Poet Laureate by Governor Newsom. Mr. Herrick found out about his appointment while teaching a class at Fresno City College. Governor Newsom and first partner Jennifer Newsom strolled into his classroom and announced that he had been selected. Mr. Herrick has written 3 books of poems, is currently working on a 4th, as well as a forthcoming memoir. Before I welcome him up, we'd like to share a short 3-minute video. It's from a few years ago during his term as Fresno Poet Laureate, and it is so beautifully done and illustrates an important part of his story.
I pulled into a gas station in Turlock, California. A woman sat in a silver minivan and thought I had gotten in her way. She mouthed the words at me, "Goddamn Jap." I pulled up, and with my emotions rushing into my chest, I parked and walked up to her by the pump. I stood by her window. "What did you say?" She said, "I didn't say anything." I said, "We both know what you said." I still remember my retort. "It's good to know racists like you are still around." She could have been my mother or my aunt. I was born in South Korea in late 1970. I was adopted to California and arrived in San Francisco on October 12th, 1971. I was not even a year old. I grew up with white parents and a white sister, all of whom I love dearly and am very close with. But adoption is a complex journey born out of trauma. I had experienced plenty of racism growing up, but in that moment, as a 20-year-old at the gas station, I think I became a poet. Today, I am the Fresno Poet Laureate, an English professor, a husband, and a father. I've written 2 books of poetry, and my work has been published alongside people like Walt Whitman, Maya Angelou, Barack Obama, even William Shakespeare. That day, I stood up for myself. I owned and became vocal and proud about my ethnicity. I remember it mostly because I found how powerful and liberating language was. I discovered how much words truly matter. They wound, they confound, and they can free us. Words can liberate us. This is what poetry can do. Last year, my 5th grade daughter told me that a kid at her school said she wasn't American. She stood up for herself and told him how wrong he was. She knows who she is and that she has a voice. I always want her to know she has a voice. We all do. We are walking, breathing poems.
Please welcome Lee Herrick.
Good evening, everyone. How are you? Oh, I'm very happy to be here. This is a beautiful library. Beautiful library. And before I get into it too much, I want to thank Terry for the kind introduction, for her kindness in bringing me here, and all the work that you do. So along with the Friends of the Library, thank you, and everyone here at the Newport Beach Public Library. Could we have a hand for Terry and everyone who does this work? Thank you. I emceed the state finals for Poetry Out Loud and was deeply moved by all of the county winners. And then the state winner for the original writing competition for the state, Poetry Ourselves, Olivia. And as she mentioned, we were in Sacramento at the state capitol on Sunday, and I had forgotten that you lived in this county. And so I'm so glad you could read. So that was amazing. Thank you, Olivia. Yeah. So I do hope there are some questions afterwards, but I think I'll just start by talking a little bit about my appointment and the laureateship, and then I'll read some poems. And I'm going to try to stay in the pocket of this reading and the poems, but whenever I'm in a library, especially one as gorgeous as this, I'm transported back to my youth, where in the days before limits on what you could check out, in the 70s, my mom had a thing where she would take my sister to the library. She would take both of us to the library and let us check out or let us take home as many books as we could carry. And it was just the greatest thing. So this feels nice to be in a library. So I was appointed late November, and as Terry mentioned, Governor Newsom and first partner Siebel Newsom walked into my classroom while I was teaching. And they were filming because the governor's office had arranged to be there to do some filming under the auspices of some arts programming and funding, things like that. But about halfway through, the door opened, and I thought it was just a student, coming in late to class. Could you imagine the governor walking into your workplace? I almost fell over, but it's been a whirlwind of joy since then. That's how I'm thinking of this laureateship. It's been a complete joy. For some of you who aren't familiar with the laureate or what that position is, typically, cities, towns have a laureate, many of them. I believe over 40 states have a state laureate. In a nutshell, we advocate and educate wherever we can for poetry. As the California Arts Council website says, from the boardrooms to the classrooms, and it really is everything in between. I've spoken to a lot of city officials in very formal settings, and about a month ago, I was at a state prison. And as I've started to say, they're all Californians. It's a massive state. As you may know, it's almost 40 million people, about 10 million more than the next most populous state, Texas. And there are poets everywhere. It's been a joy. So I think I'll read some poems here. So this is a poem that I wrote when I was thinking about things I've seen in California. I should say maybe I live in Fresno. I've lived there now about 27 years, so it's definitely home. After I was adopted from Korea, we lived in Danville in the East Bay, if anyone knows that town. I lived there for about 8 years. And then I lived in Modesto. My parents and sister still live in Modesto. And the other main town I think of in California as a second hometown is a town called Ojai, where I've got a lot of family as well. But this was the poem I wrote when I was thinking about things I'd seen and hoped for and imagined in California. My California. Here, an olive votive keeps the sunset lit. The Korean 20-somethings talk about hyphens, graduate school, and good pot. And a group of 4 at a window table in Carpinteria discuss the quality of wines in Napa Valley versus Lodi. Here, in my California, the streets remember the Chicano poet whose songs still bank off Fresno's beer-soaked gutters and almond trees in partial blossom. Here, in my California, we fish out long noodles from the pho with such accuracy you'd know we'd done this before. In Fresno, the bullets tire of themselves and begin to pray 5 times a day. In Fresno, we hope for less of the police state and more of a state of grace. In my California, you can watch the sun go down like in your California, on the ledge of the pregnant 22nd century, the one with the bounty of peaches and grapes, red onions, and the good salsa, wine and japchae. Here in my California, paperbacks are free. Farmers markets are 24 hours a day and always packed. The trees and water have no nails in them. The priests eat well. The homeless eat well. Here in my California, everywhere is Chinatown. Everywhere is K-Town. Everywhere is Armenia Town. Everywhere, a little Italy. Less Confederacy. No internment in the valley. Better history texts for the juniors. In my California, free sounds and free touch. Free questions, free answers, free songs from parents and poets, those hopeful bodies of light. And so I also started thinking, thank you. You don't have to do that, but that's very kind. What a state. I don't have to tell you. I'm going to refrain from launching into my, how many of you are this thing? But I imagine many, if not most, are Californians. There's a pretty good Korean adoptee community in California. There are only about 200,000 of us, estimates say, in the whole world. Quite a few in the Twin Cities area, Bay Area, Southern California. I've not met my birth mother or first mother, as we call them. I've not met and I'm going to read a poem that relates to this. And I've not met my birth father or first father. I've been back to Korea twice. Terry and I were talking about this. Been back to Korea twice, but I've not met my birth family, immediate family. I've met some very distant cousins through DNA testing, which was a real joy, you know. But this poem I'm going to read, I wrote with my birth mother in mind, so it's kind of a love song for her, but it's also very much, I think, a love song for adoptees everywhere. How music stays in the body, Your body is a song called Birth or First Mother, a miracle that gave birth to another exquisite song. One song raises 3 boys with a white husband. One song fought an American war overseas. One song leapt from 14 stories high and like a dead bird shattered into the clouds. Most forgot the lyrics to their own bodies or decided to paint abstracts of mountains or moons in the shape of your face. I've been told mothers don't forget the body. I can't remember your face, the shape or story, or how you held me the day I was born, so I wrote 1,000 poems to survive. I want to sing with you in an open field, a simple room, or a quiet bar. I want to hear your opinions about angels. Truth is, angels drink too. Soju spilled on the halo, white wings sticky with gin, as if any mother could forget the music that left her. You should hear how loudly I sing now. I've become a ballad of wild dreams and coping mechanisms. I can breathe now through any fire. I imagine I got this from him or you, my earthly inheritance, your arms, your sigh, your heavy song. I know all the lyrics. I know all the blood. I know why angels howl into the moonlight. So, thank you. Thank you. Let's see. I wasn't planning on reading this. Yeah, I wasn't planning on reading this, but I'm going to read this. It's just a short poem. It's my against suicide poem for a friend whose brother took his life. And then I'll try to shift gears a bit. Stay. I am not what you thought an ocean would look like. But once a fire starts in you, there will always be ash. There are long walks, thank goodness. There are woods to be small in. There are anchors to the world, so you will not fly away before it is time. The miracle of grass, even though you may forget it. The fact that you are loved, even though you may forget it. And what a miracle that is, being loved. Or more so, that you are a wide blue ocean capable of loving. You churning body of sea life who survived the oil spills, the broken glass, and the dead birds floating in the bay. I'm going to just read through some, and I don't know if you feel like clapping at the end. You can give me one at the end. There's always that, I don't know if people feel obligated or something, but so I'm going to shift gears a bit. I don't know if there's a theme here or not, but that's a question, and you're going to get it as you're writing, Olivia. I'll be coming to your book signings, or if there are any writers in here, there are questions that we often will get. And one is about themes or what inspires you, and there's a lot I could say about those, but I always come back to this, that my favorite theme, or one of my main inspirations, is people who make it through things. Perseverance, survival, struggle, that kind of thing. So this poem I wrote, I was teaching up near Lake Tahoe, and there was a really fancy. I don't go to the orchestra a lot, or the symphony. I don't know if I should be saying this right now. I'm usually at the rock, the loud, But there was not a director, there was a conductor practicing with one of the violinists. And they exchanged some dialogue, and it was the perfect end to this poem about perseverance. So, this is titled Repertoire. Repertoire. The nastiest lick in the whole damn repertoire is in the first movement, the conductor said to the first violin. A concerto like tonight's is a dream swell, a dark circus of fluted magic, the nasty hell of your own difficult year, the bright chorus of your own survival, awash in a floral weave of ocean foam among the dreaming musicians preparing for the nasty lick, their lips tightened like fists, rusted knives in a deep inventory. One blade for large game, one blade for short trees, one blade for berries, and one blade for gutting the whole damn idea. We have what the conductor would call a repertoire. How to maneuver if you aren't in tune, how to bail when the wave overtakes you, when the concerto has such mean licks you almost break, and the lights dizzy the fighter in you, but your repertoire comes back in some animal moment, your breath now in time with your instrument, and everything aligns as it should. Your glistening body healed from the incision, your flawed key buried under your shining knives, your favorite chapter, your go-to song. Thank you. Okay. So, I'm going to do a how many of you question. I said I wasn't going to do this. Are there any crossword puzzle people here, or Scrabble players, or things like that? I love that. One person just went like this, like, I love that. Yes. But word games, do you like word games? And even on the phone, I haven't played Wordle, but I think that's very popular too these days. That's a word game, right? Okay. So this poem is called Flight, and I wrote it when I was flying to the Pacific Northwest. And the seat in front of you that used to have the magazine? That's another post-pandemic change. There's no longer a magazine in front of you on most airlines. But you remember the magazine used to have crossword puzzle in the back? I picked it up, and 2 people had already started it. But I thought, I'll jump in and see what I can do. And it really just became a poem thinking about people's lives, Flight. The in-flight magazine crossword partially done, a corner begun here, scratched out answers there, one set of answers in pencil, another in the green. And the woman with the green ballpoint knew the all-time hit king is Rose. And the Siem Reap treasure is Angkor Wat. And the woman, perhaps en route to hold her dying mother's hand in Seattle, forgot about death for 10 minutes while remembering her husband's Cincinnati Reds hat while gardening after the diagnosis. Her handwriting was so clean. Maybe she was a surgeon. Maybe a painter. No. What painter wouldn't know 17 down? Diego's love. 5 letters. In a rush, her dying mother's voice came back to her. Or maybe she was a Chinese adoptee, and her first mother's imagined voice said, "Wo ai ni." At 30,000 feet, you focus on 33 across. Asian American classic, The Woman. When a stranger in the window seat sees the clue, watches me write in W, and she says, "Warrior." And for a moment, you forget it is your favorite memoir, and she reminds you of lilies or roses, Van Gogh or stems with thorns, art galleries in romantic cities where she is headed, but you should not go. The flight attendant grazes my shoulder. The crossword squares, the letters, the chairs and aisles seem so tight in flight, but there is nothing here but room, really. Maybe the next passenger will know what I do not. 64 down, 5 letters, purpose. And why do we remember what we do? We know the buzz of Dickinson's fly and the number of years in Marquez's solitude. But some things we will never know, as it should be. Why the body sometimes rumbles like a plane hurtling over southern Oregon. How exactly we fall in love, or if Frida and Maxine Hong Kingston would have loved the same kind of tea. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Let's see. I think I'll read a few more. I'm going to read, I think, one more, and then a couple new ones, and I'll finish with a poem from the book. This is just a short poem titled Exile. Exile. Our natural state is not defensive or tense, but water in a resting state. We state this to be true in an age of inquiry, our failure to put what is just before ease. There are lovers in another country reclining by a fire, admitting love in a common language with faith in the exiles of their state, where a woman looks at her friend and says, "Please, put down your bag and stay. Please, stay to see how the movie ends. Take my hand. I think the city might go up in flames." And then I think I'll read one more short one here. Oh, thank you. One more short one. This is a poem in 4 parts titled Breath. 1. By the time I discovered my body, it was perfectly human. All this sin, the chambers and aorta of the large muscle. I was a series of numbers on a chart, the start of the mouth. 2. If you gather the data from the robots of your city, the wires all shine in certain light, and the kids inhale a canopy of polluted air, heave a last prayer. 3. We call the body, heart calls the body calls the hurt natural. We call nature a tree on fire from only heat, its own burn. 4. We call this idea agriculture, poetry culture, or office culture. The sum, the atoms, what you take in before you let breath out. Thank you. I'm going to read a couple new ones. So I realized after taking a DNA test that I have a hearing condition that I always knew I had, but I never knew the name of it. And I want to read a poem about sound and things like that. Keep adding poems into this. I don't know why I'm doing this. I don't know, Terry, or if any and I'm not saying this to placate any of the amazing librarians, but you know what I tell my close friends when you say things just silly to your friends. I said one time, and then I kind of liked it. So what I said was, if the world ever needs saving, I think it's going to be writers, farmers, and librarians who will save the world. Okay, can I just say that? There's a library opening in Fresno, and I was asked to write a poem. This is a very light poem, but I wrote it for the library. And I thought, since we're here, can I read this? It's library poem. Thank you. Just a light poem. It's a sonnet, right? 14 lines, and yeah. Library sonnet. I'm looking for a good book where I can find part of myself I need to discover, where I can get lost, read, explore, escape. Robots, recipes, rookies who made it big. Once, I took home a story that made me feel alive, free, new. I returned it on time, no late fee, and couldn't stop dreaming for weeks. Anytime, anywhere, I'm at home in a library. There is hope and help shelved next to the joy. Whatever your question or emotion, weary, needful, ready for inspiration, something scary, the poetry, the stories, they say, please enjoy this light for you and in you, this world of possibility. And I'm going to just read one more new poem. Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm just going to forego the sound poem and read this poem. Did I get booed? That was amazing. That was kind of amazing. In the best possible. I was reading in Pacific Grove at a beautiful library there, and it was a smaller crowd. And I said, I'm just going to read one more. And a woman in the front row looked at me and she went, 5 more. I was like, oh my God. It's kind of awesome. I'm just going to read one more new one, and then I'll finish with the last poem in the book from Scar and Flower, and then maybe some questions, I hope. At the risk of taking anybody back too much, but just momentarily, as I introduce this poem, I was in May 2020, if you can remember that nightmare month. God, thank you. We're beyond that. But in May 2020, I was contacted by a publisher, and they asked me if I would write a poem about food and open spaces. And at the time, I was on my 5th bag of Ruffles, just gorging on. And it was very hard to write. Some people wrote, but I was just trying to survive, But I did somehow end up finishing a poem, so I want to read that. This poem. It's really just a poem about a love for food trucks. And for you poets, it's an abecedarian, which is just a form, 26-line poem where every line of the poem is the next letter of the alphabet. It's titled Abecedarian Love Song for Street Food, and it has an epigraph from the late Anthony Bourdain, who said, "Street food, I believe, is the salvation of the human race." All praise for the pozole glistening in midday light by the grace of the woman near the comal. In Southern California, Raul Martinez unveiled a mobile downtown gold mine of Al Pastor by a bar in East LA for the drunks, the artists, and the necessary future waiting in line. Praise be to the ice cream truck. Glory of the van's slow roll, so praise the van. Hut, cart, booth, tent, stall, stand, bike, or truck. I once devoured a tlayuda in Oaxaca City, broke down just as the sunlight burst through the heart of a woman kissing her baby's forehead by the plaza. When I say love, what I mean to say is I dream of you through disaster, malady, or that nightmare anxiety pandemic. But now, even in this late dying, let us praise the 20,000 open-hearted vendors in Bangkok and the glorious pupusas in San Salvador. I ate on a bench near a dove. Quesadilla, arepa, tteokbokki, hallelujah. The banh mi right on the outskirts of Hue. The chili pepper, the cilantro songs, praise the Zocalo saints who brought me to tears with a taco so full of music I almost wept. Under the Beijing moonlight, baozi is made by angels, vendors with wings if you know where to look. On West 53rd and 6th Avenue, New York City halal, or in Fresno, no xenophobe is welcome. Tell me what to eat. Your chuan, your elote, your mouthful of pure zen, like savory, surprising flashes of heaven. Thank you so much. And this will be the last poem. This is the last poem in Scar and Flower. My wife is a huge reader and a great essayist too. She'll have a memoir in a few years. She's a big reader, and our daughter is a big reader too. And this is just a short poem that was sort of inspired by overhearing my daughter reading. She was about 3, I think, at the time, 3 or 4. She's 17 now, but she was about 3 or 4, and I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could hear her sort of mouthing the words or saying the words. So I was just thinking about her future. The house is quiet except my daughter reads on the couch, whispers the dialogue. I only hear the consonants of her name, the way I imagine a house of books in a future age. 2035, when I will be 65 and alive, I hope, and she will be 31, perhaps with faith and a love she can count on. Wild trees, wild flowers, a man or a woman, perhaps God or someone else to whom she can whisper dialogue if she forgets where her heart is. How there is a pulse in every book. How looking down into the open page reminds us of prayer, the next night of restoration, and the light around her body. Thank you. Thank you.
Lee, thank you so much
Thank you.
for sharing your poetry with us. We do have a handful of questions, and if anyone has any, just raise your hand. Victoria will be happy to come around, or if you'd like a card and pencil, she can bring you that. But I'll start with the ones that we have. Okay, you ready for the first question?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to read these first two actually together because they're kind of similar. How old were you when you wrote your first poem, and when did you start writing poetry? Two separate questions, but kind of similar.
Good questions. How old? The earliest memory I have of writing a poem, my mom kept a school assignment. I think it was in 4th grade, and it was a 4-line poem called Football, and it rhymed. And I'm a huge sports fan to this day, but even then I was writing and thinking about sports. That's the first poem I remember writing. I also, what I like to say is that I think there's certain music and language with us our making of it. I want to believe that there was poetry in my life in Korea. That's just a feeling. And then the second part was, when did I start writing poetry in earnest, more in earnest, I think?
Yes.
Yeah. In high school, really in middle school, I had a teacher, Mrs. Hennings, who made us, do you remember the sentence diagramming? And there was a lot of, you had to memorize things. And she made us memorize all the auxiliary verbs. And I used to have a debilitating fear of public speaking, so that assignment terrified me. But I also kind of loved it because I loved language. And so that was an early memory. And then in high school, the late, great Nancy Barr, exposed us to some of the canonical texts with which students become familiar at that age, Shakespeare and Ben Jonson and Chaucer. But Shakespeare's sonnets in particular were impactful for me. And then I just started writing and discovering other poets, contemporary poets, Californian poets. And that's when I really started to think that it was a place for all of the uncertainty and emotions and anger that I was experiencing. So high school, probably, and then definitely in college I started to study it more formally.
Thank you. Mm-hmm. Do you have a favorite poet or author?
Oh boy, many. I loved Frank O'Hara from New York, 50s, 60s. I was probably influenced by the Beats. I know some of them didn't love that term, but in San Francisco, I loved that spirit. I grew up listening to like Jimi Hendrix and Led Zeppelin and Janis Joplin, so any poetry in that spirit really spoke to me then. I loved Walt Whitman and still do. One of my favorite poets, contemporary poets, is probably the Chicago poet Lee Young Lee. Lee Young Lee is brilliant, I think. His second book, The City in Which I Love You, and his first book, Rose, were very formative for me. Juan Felipe Herrera, former California and U.S. Poet Laureate, is a good friend, but also very instrumental as a model. Those are some that come to mind, but many. Yeah.
Okay, next question. What is your process when composing a poem? Do you write down some images first? Do you write in prose first? Do you revise as you go along?
Yeah, so this would maybe be a good time. This might be a longer answer, but when I was a kid, I used to have these hearing things. It wasn't autism related, but I always just remember thinking I was very different for many reasons, but that one included. And then it kind of went away, and then probably in my late 20s, early 30s, it became something very unpleasant, just a visceral, painful reaction to certain sounds. And when I took a DNA test about 5 years ago, it came back because, as an adoptee, it's different. Domestic adoption often, it's not better or worse, it's different. Often the adoptee is with, or they meet the family, or the mother who places the child is in the child's life and things like that. Not that it's a walk in the park, but for transnational adoptees, that's not the case. And so I never knew my medical history. And so when I found out what I had, it's called misophonia, and the term has only been coined maybe 20 years ago. It's just something I've had to learn to cope with. Now, to get to the question, what is my writing process like? Sound is my first entry point into some portal with language. I mean, it manifests in the writing, and then the poem, and then maybe the reading of it for an audience. But the initial trigger for me, of the 5 senses, or 6 if you count intuition, is almost predominantly and almost always sound. Sometimes it's an image too. Once I saw a trail of ladybugs washed up on the beach in the line of foam that a wave will leave. Sometimes an image, but usually it's sound. I just can hear things a lot, This is a really clean sounding building too, if that makes sense to you. I can hear someone saying something. So yeah, those are my entryways into poems. And then I just sort of let it take its own life. One of my favorite descriptions of what this poet likes when he reads a poem, and then he tries to infuse those things in the poem through the revision process, also are 3 things at once. An intellectual interest or rigor or engagement on an intellectual level, an emotional resonance, and a linguistic resonance. But my initial impulse is always the sound, and, not to go too much into one of the poems, but there's a line in How Music Stays in the Body. I want to sing with you in an open field, a simple room, or a quiet bar. Those are all, that's meter and sort of things I'm doing in that poem for sound. So, and then do I revise? All the time. Athletes call it being a gym rat. Artists love getting messy. I love the revision process. I think I can't speak for other artists, but most any writer I know is going to say that you got to love the process as much as the performance, But I love all of it.
Interesting. And then this next question kind of goes along with you describing the sound as that being sort of like the beginning point of your inspiration. Do you listen to music or need complete silence when you write? So once you've heard that sound, then do you need silence or?
That's a good question. Sometimes I write to music, but not very often anymore. To either music, and some of you might do this also, but it's got to either be music with no lyrics at all, or music that I know so much that I can't possibly be distracted by it. Like, I've listened to Led Zeppelin 1, 2, 3, 4, Houses of the Holy a million times. So if I put that record on, I will not be taken out of the poem because I want to hear what Jimmy Page is doing in the song. But it's too distracting for me if I have music on. Usually I'm not writing to any music. I like to write in the morning. I'm very much a morning person. My wife is definitely an evening person. But I'm a morning person, so I write in the mornings. And I think that, and I know that this question wasn't seeking advice, but that's one thing I always say is a person needs to do it enough to know what and why and how and when they do it well and when they don't, and do more of the former, do more of the stuff that works for you. So I'm always experiencing sound and then taking notes for future poems.
Makes sense. Yeah. Where do you typically go and sit to write poetry?
My first book I wrote largely in plazas in Asia and Latin America. Those are great outdoor countries. The U.S. is a great outdoor country for parks and things like that, but it's not a great place for plazas, except maybe Manhattan, you'll see people, but the U.S. is like, moving along. What are you doing here? So, but the first book, and it's different for me, book to book. The first book I wrote a lot outdoors. I was traveling a lot. Now I jot down. Now I'm using my phone a lot more, but jot down notes on my phone. But when I'm actually drafting, I have a very comfortable chair at home that I like to write in. Very much a creature of habit. So in that chair, there's a window and there are birds outside. I've got several bird feeders. This is the geeky portion of the talk. But yeah, in that comfortable chair. Yeah.
Sounds lovely.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, next question. Do you have any
Bless you.
thoughts about learning the Korean language so that you can write poems in Korean?
So these are all wonderful questions. When I went back to Korea in 2001 for a brief time, and then 2008 for a longer time. I was on sabbatical, and I spent a couple months there. And I was decent with the language, speaking it. No, it wasn't decent, but it was survival Korean, But writing I can't do. I've had my poems translated into a few languages, including Korean, but I couldn't read them. Yeah, it's something that I feel like I should do. It's sort of in the back of my mind. It hasn't been a burning desire to do, but it's making me think that I might try something. There's a line that in How Music Stays in the Body, there's that line about one song leapt from 14 stories high and like a dead bird shattered into the clouds. That's sort of a nod to an adoptee who took his life after being deported. He should not have been deported. There's a loophole in the adoption laws, but that's another conversation. Yeah. I hope I answered that. Yeah.
What has been your favorite part of being the California Poet Laureate?
These are really good questions. Well, to sort of bridge back to that previous question about Korea, I didn't realize it until they let me know, but being the first Asian American does have a part in it, especially because I grew up for probably the first 25 years of my life questioning how Asian I really was and all of that. And I think that, I think there could have been one before me, and I hope to goodness there are some after me. But as far as generally speaking, the California Poet Laureate, what's been the most enjoyable part? Oh, boy. I want to try to be in the moment as much as I can. One thing I remember thinking before I accepted the nomination, I remember thinking, okay, I thought it was a long shot. There's so many great poets here in California. And a lot of people could be doing this, but I thought if it even happens, I remember thinking I need to be, one, more comfortable or with as much travel and social, because I'm kind of an introvert. And the other part is just so busy. And I think I was telling you before, April's National Poetry Month, I had 27 events last month. And so it's a good amount of travel. So what's my favorite part is really trying to be present everywhere I am, in every moment that I am. And when I'm that way, the joy, and I'm not just saying, the joy is everywhere. It's everywhere. I'm telling you, I've been in cities and little towns I had not heard of, and maybe 3,000 people in the whole town. And then you show up and the Friends of the Library is there. And it's a vibrant, wonderful community, you know. I was at a state prison, and just meeting those people and hearing, you know, about their writing and, you know, there are the other things that some of my friends say, I don't want to hear about that. Just tell me, like, if you met anybody famous, you know, stuff like that. Olivia competed, you were at Get Lit, so I that was fun, judging Get Lit. I judged a poetry contest in LA, and one of the other judges was Malcolm Jamal Warner, who played Theo Huxtable from The Cosby Show. Stuff like that's been fun. And obviously meeting the governor and first partner and their staff, and working with the amazing California Arts Council. Young people, probably up there, meeting students. I just want to remember it, you know. I just want to try to remember it and be present. Yeah, it's all been joy. Yeah.
I love that, entering each moment, being present in each moment. I think that's good advice for all of us.
Yeah.
Okay, so next question. This person is curious why you haven't met your birth mother. Are you unable to find, or do you not want to?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, some adoptees don't want to. My feeling is that most do, but have different degrees of interest or ability to verbalize that. But some don't. For example, I mean, my sister's adopted too. She's white, domestic adoptee, and she just doesn't have any interest in it. And I kind of believe her, you know. She, so to each their own, his or her or their own, really. My case, I didn't think about it probably until I was about 30. You know, grew up very. In that time, it was, oh, we don't see you as Korean, and oh, you're just like us, and oh, you're so lucky. And that's all very well intended. I know that. But of course, we know now that's just erasure. That's just difficult. It's compressing down on me. So it took me a long time for what adoptees call coming out of the adoptee fog. It's like, oh, wait. When I used to get called racist slurs all the time at school, all the time, it hurt, but it confused me because the white kid who was telling me to go back to China looked like my cousins. You know what I mean? But I didn't look like their cousin. I looked like what they hated and feared. So then I started becoming more familiar with the culture. When my first book came out in 2007, I met a lot of adoptees from around the world. I went from meeting only one in Ojai to meeting hundreds and hundreds. I've spoken all over the world now for adoptee-related things, so that's been amazing. So to the question, it took me a while to get to the point where I said, oh, I would like to meet her or search. I did a birth family search in 2008. Very emotional, very difficult. I swear it felt like it took me a year afterwards to recover from that emotional terrain. But nothing came of it. Korean adoption, Chinese adoption, most Asian transnational adoption, the records we aren't given records. The access is very difficult. You're told different things that may or may not be true. So, you know, that's part of it. But I did a DNA test. Here's the latest thing I'll share with you. I did a DNA test, and most of those were fourth or fifth cousins, very distant, but it's been wonderful to meet them. But I did locate, and I should say also, I'm not actively searching. You know, some are actively and just full sort of throttle searching. Mine goes in waves. But I met a second cousin through DNA from Daejeon, where I was born, and his parents agreed to take DNA tests. And so he thinks maybe there might be some kind of close thing there. I don't know. I don't have my hopes up, but that's kind of the latest, and I'm supposed to hear back in a few months on that. But I think we have to make our peace, because sometimes we don't get all the answers, you know? Yeah.
And then kind of along the same, if you're feeling comfortable answering.
I'm
my,
pretty
my family adopted my younger brother from Korea. Do you have any advice for how siblings can support their adopted family members?
Oh, we're getting into it now. That's good. These are good questions. I'm here. You might as well ask me. For siblings specifically.
Well, it says for how siblings can support their adopted family members. So yes.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't know if this person wants to divulge it or not, but I'll just say my answer might vary slightly based on the age of the adoptee currently and the race or ethnicity of his or her or their family, right?
They're adopted from Korea.
They're adopted from
Yeah,
Korea, but
yeah.
I mean the adoptive family. Let's say, for example, the adoptive family is white. I think. Okay, I'm gonna say this with love, okay? But we just have certain privileges, and this, you know, as a male, don't I have some privileges, male privilege? And I'm not calling men evil by saying that, but to say there's not white privilege things, it's not attacking all white people. It's just, there's privileges, you know. So I think recognizing some fundamental stuff first, you know what I mean? Because if you're just giving them another Korean DVD, right, but the foundation stuff is rooted in othering and erasure and why do you care about Korea? All the DVDs in the world, in my experience, won't mean a whole lot in the long run. So the one thing I would say is, if and when, you know, I say this to my students all the time, allow everybody the right to their traumas. You know what I'm saying? It's I grew up, they probably just had a bad day. It can just be racist. And for me, and there's a book called 10 Things Every Adoptee Wishes Their Families Knew. There's a lot of good books on this stuff now, especially by Korean adoptees who are of age, who are writing and publishing. But I think just recognizing those things, and sometimes that might even be ahead of the adoptee. The adoptee might not even know it yet, you know. But I think just recognizing those things is helpful. Not judging, giving them their emotions, you know. Not correcting or dismissing. Those things come to mind. Sticking up always helps too. I remember my sister, who's white, she's about 2 years older than me. These kids they were calling me some racist name, and they were calling me a Japanese racist slur. And my sister, who was only about 9 at the time, said, "He's Korean, you know, so he's not Japanese." So just that stuff goes a long way if your family member is the only person of color, the only person of color in your family, because they're probably not sharing everything they experience with you. And a lot of good books out there, you know. Yeah. Can I just say, whoever asked that, I don't know that I've been asked that at a reading like this, so I appreciate those questions. Yeah.
Okay, we'll shift back to poetry now.
Okay.
Why is it so hard to find a poetry agent?
Oh. These are great questions. Well, for one, as far as creative writers go, most agents are looking for nonfiction, fiction, you know, memoir, and other things like that. Agents are selling books to major publishing houses, ideally, for big advances, and poetry isn't that kind of genre. to me, poetry in the United States is like soccer in the United States. Do you know what I'm saying? Like if Landon Donovan walked through here, or Clint Dempsey, or Tisha Venturini, I'd know who they are. But most Americans wouldn't know. That's how poetry is. If I see like whoever, Natalie Diaz but so I don't think agents, now that's for literary signing agents. A lot of poets have booking agents. Like I have an assistant who assists me with a lot of the booking and the travel. But as far as selling books to agents, that's usually pretty rare. And a lot of times first book contests don't require an agent to submit. Some big publishing houses in fiction, creative nonfiction, won't even take subs unless it's from an agent. So those are some reasons. On the agent question. Yeah.
What tips do you have for performance jitters? I think how to not be emotional on personal topics in public.
It's a great question. My oldest, closest friend is working on a memoir, and in his family, 7 people have committed suicide. It's just a heartbreaking and heart-repairing, ultimately, memoir that I hope finds an agent soon. But he has a very hard time reading in public still. So there's a lot of different things I would say about that. I wrote in a poem once, like, tears are liquefied God. Like, tears usually happen when you don't plan. I don't think most people say, okay, I'm going to cry now, unless you're an actor. It usually is involuntary, and then something comes over you. So tips for, I think, reading it enough to where you realize you're performing, and that's got to be different to some extent than the sharing with a friend or a family member or therapist. There's got to be some distance. There's got to be something where it's a poem, it's a piece of art, it ought to be. Now, that's not to say a good poem might always stir with you when you read it. But if you can't get through the poem, maybe it's not yet there, and give yourself all the space and time for it to be with you before it's shared if you want. And then what I also tell him is, or anybody else, is a little emotion is okay. I don't know I think for audiences it varies how much is okay before it becomes uncomfortable for an audience. But I say honor that. And then once you're to the point where you can do it, practicing it, I call it staying in the pocket of the poem, whatever might distract you. Like when I was reading a poem, there was a woman with a couple of smaller kids, and I just love seeing kids that are reading. But I had to remind myself to stay in the poem, not watch the kids and the guardian or that parent. So with emotional difficulty, all those things, And then one last thing I'll say is, as the famous saying, no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. If there's some emotional resonance in you as you're writing it, that might be a good sign for its eventual publication, because an audience might be stirred by that too. So when it's time, you'll know. Mm-hmm.
So we have time for 2 more questions. I'm going to read these last 2. I'm sorry if we did not get to your question. Any of you. Favorite books or series as a child?
Well, they weren't really series, but anything sports related. I read books, those big picture books like 10 Great Battles of the NBA and the 10 best Super Bowls, Jets, Packers. I loved those choose your own adventure books. I think I was into Nancy Drew for a while. Those come to mind. Yeah, I was just reading everything with sports, honestly, biographies, even Pelé, the great Brazilian player. Um, and it all translates, you know? That's just reading. I remember when I became an English major, she was asking me if I liked to read, and I said, well, I like to read about sports. You know, she said, so you like to read? I said, well, about sports. He likes to read, you know. So, yeah.
Okay, and our final question will end on, what does it mean to be Californian?
Well, I can only answer for myself. That's the first thing that comes to mind. I can only answer for myself. For me, I mean, that's interesting because it's different than what is California to you? What does it mean to be Californian? Well, I'm going to answer it by saying when I think of California, I think of what a lot of people think about first who aren't from here, and maybe who are from here also, which is all the bounty and invention and opportunity. I mean, look where we are. This is a gorgeous, gorgeous place, town on planet Earth, right? And so the natural beauty of it, I think of our statehood, right? 1850, we became the 31st state. Year before that, gold was discovered, right? So that sort of, and we're South Bay, where I'm a couple hours from where I live, Silicon Valley, Google headquarters, eBay, Facebook, Netflix. But also very much I think about farm workers, I think about immigrants, I think about refugees, I think about homelessness. Do you know? Internment. So I think to be Californian maybe means, for me, all of that, but also thinking about what else we can do. I think it's a very progressive, and I know there are conservative pockets, but we lead in many ways. And I take pride in that. Whether it's agriculture, the arts, media, you know? So I think any of those ways we can continue to expand opportunity, creativity, will just continue to widen opportunity. And yeah, it's a pretty great place. So I don't know if I answered. To be Californian, maybe that's what it means for me. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Lee,
Thank
for
you.
sharing yourself and your gifts.
Thank you.